Hello, folks. I wanted to touch on the Nicolas Maduro issue that went on the 3rd. Just some things that have been floating around in my brain about it. So I had a conversation with ChatGPT about it, and we're gonna just go into that. So what I told ChatGPT is, I get that it's literally insane that the U.S. took Maduro, but it seems like he rigged or manipulated elections of the country, Venezuela, in the first place. With all the condemnation from the UN Security Council and other member states, doesn't the U.S. have the right to rectify the wrongs that went on there? It's very complex, and I definitely don't condone at all Donald Trump or his dictatorship or the U.S. dictating how to run another country, such as taking control of the oil or installing new presidents without the will of the people. But it seems like there should be some kind of justification here. Um, I don't know. I just see all this negative and nothing like supporting. And we're the United States, right? So usually there's something that makes sense to like why we did something. So I did say, like, we went after Hitler and we went after Saddam Hussein, you know, I don't know. I said, what do you got on the topic? So it says, here's a clearer picture of what's going on and why it feels so conflicting, because you're right, the situation isn't black and white and reactions aren't uniform. So, why many in the U.S. government think action was justified? Supporters or defenders of the U.S. position often point to several arguments. Allegations of illegitimacy. All right. So, Maduro's election, especially the 2018 to 2024, have been widely condemned by the international community and international observers as neither free nor fair. Many countries and organizations didn't recognize those results. The U.S. and other governments have long labeled Maduro's regime as authoritarian and argued that Venezuela's democratic institutions were hollowed out. Okay? So they use sanctions as a pressure tool. For years, the U.S. slapped sanctions on Maduro, his families, and entities tied to Venezuela's oil, claiming they're meant to curb corruption, drug trafficking, and to preserve assets for the Venezuelan people, rather than allowing Maduro to access them. Drugs and crime charges. The United States government designated Venezuela's security apparatus, the so-called Cartel of the Suns, as terrorists and narco terrorists, alleging they traffic drugs into the U.S. and fund repression. So, just about this Cartel of the Suns, I saw an article. I don't have it to pull up for you, but I saw an article that discussed that the Department of Justice had to actually drop that claim that there is a cartel of the Suns. So, anyways, let's keep going. Historical foreign policy claims. Some proponents frame it through doctrines like the Monroe Doctrine, asserting the right to counter hostile regional governments to protect U.S. interests. So there are stated arguments Maduro lacked democratic legitimacy. Was accused of corruption and drug trafficking, and U.S. leaders described sanctions and interventions as pressure to restore democracy and defend U.S. security. So ChatGPT goes on to say, why much of the world strongly rejects that justification. The international response and even legal scholars largely disagree with the idea that the U.S. had a legitimate right to invade or seize assets. Number one, it violates international law. Experts in International laws say the U.S. had no legal right to conduct military operations on Venezuela's soil without UN authorization or the consent of the Venezuelan government, even for criminal charges. 2. Sovereignty in the UN Charter. Many countries, including South Africa and Spain's prime minister, have condemned the U.S.'s operation as a violation of the United Nations Charter and an illegal intervention that undermines sovereignty. The next one, accusations of a resource grab. Some governments and commentators argue this isn't really about democracy, but about Venezuela's vast oil reserves and geopolitical influence. Critics see it as a dangerous precedent akin to the Iraqi-style regime change. Civilian impact and regional stability. Reports indicate that the U.S. military strikes caused dozens of deaths. May they rest in peace, I'm so sorry. And fueled regional tensions, raising humanitarian concerns. Comparison to World War II, Iraq, or Saddam/Hitler. Your instincts about parallels is understandable. History does not shape how people judge modern events, but does shape, not does not. History does shape how people judge modern events, but there are some key differences. Hitler and Saddam. Those invasions were tied to global coalitions in World War II or UN authorizations in the 1990 Gulf War. They involved clearer, broader threats, Nazi aggression, or invasion of Kuwait. U.S. to Venezuela case. There is no UN Security Council mandate here. The U.S. acted unilaterally, and the global community widely condemned it, including U.S. own allies. Even some Venezuelans want Maduro gone, but almost none support foreign military occupation as a way to do it. So while comparisons to past force for good interventions are emotionally powerful, the legal and diplomatic context is very different at this time. The big tension. This is the core dilemma people struggle with. On one side, Maduro's regime has been widely criticized for authoritarianism, which we're experiencing, election manipulation, economic collapse, and alleged criminal networks. On the other side, international norms after World War II strongly protect state sovereignty and prohibit foreign military operations without broad international approval. Most critics argue that even if Maduro deserved to be removed, the method unilaterally military action and asset seizure without international legal backing undermines global law and sets a dangerous precedent that could make the world less stable and not more stable. And I agree, because what if Russia went and took Zelensky? Or what if, Iran went and took, what's his name? Netanyahu. And, what if someone came and took Trump? Like that, right. So anyways, moving on. So what's the takeaways? Yes, many people see the Maduro as a illegitimate or harmful, and there were long-standing sanctions and political pressure on his government. But there is no broad legal or international consensus that gives any country the right to invade or seize another sovereign nation's government or assets. This action has drawn significant condemnation, including from allies and UN member states. The justification remains highly contested, with arguments ranging from legitimate law enforcement to illegal aggression masked by other interests. In short, your instinct that people feel there should be rationale makes sense. But in international law and international relations, what is justified and what is legal aren't the same thing here. So I went on to say, I don't know. I don't feel the U.S. should have to garner support or permission from the UN. Uh, was there permission to go into Afghanistan or Iraq? But also, why did Biden raise the bounty for Maduro to 25 million? Just curious here. I'm like, I don't like what I saw, but I'm like, it seems like we've done this stuff before. It seems like other countries have done it. Like, I don't know, Russia and Ukraine, that's a whole different story. But like, did Russia have the UN authorization to go into Ukraine? And they're calling it a special operation. So, like, what does that even mean? So anyway, I'm just asking questions, and it tells me you're asking a really fair and important question, because a bounty on someone, especially the leader of another country, sounds wild and raises the same kind of legal and moral questions as the broader intervention. Here's what actually is going on with context and nuance. Why there was a bounty on Maduro, U.S. criminal charges against Maduro. The U.S. government does have an ongoing criminal case against Nicolas Maduro. Federal prosecutors in the U.S. indicted Maduro on narcotics trafficking and narco-terrorism charges, alleging he led the so-called Cartel of the Suns and was involved in conspiracy to transport cocaine into the U.S. and work with other cartels. So again, that whole Cartel of the Sun thing, that's in question, because we don't even know if that's an actual, like, real group, or if it was just like something the U.S. kind of dubbed. Because there were criminal charges, the U.S. government, through the State Department and the Justice Department, can offer a reward for information leading to his arrest or conviction, just like they would for any other fugitive. Increased from 15 million to 25 million. The original reward was 15 million under the Trump administration in 2020, when Maduro was controversially inaugurated for a third term in January 2025, widely seen abroad as illegitimate. The Biden administration increased that reward to 25 million to maintain pressure and signal continued U.S. rejection of his leadership. Okay, so it wasn't a new bounty from zero. It was an increase on an existing one tied to long-standing criminal allegations. Then to 50 million, which I didn't know. So later in August 2025, the U.S. doubled that again to 50 million, making it the largest reward ever offered by the U.S. for a foreign head of state, according to official records. Now, I heard that the U.S. had like spies, or they had some, like a Venezuelan person that was close to Maduro that was working with them to provide all this information about where to find them and whatnot. And I wonder if they got that $50 million. And I don't want to make any allegations, but, it seems really weird that things were able to just kind of move forward very quickly the next day with a new president. Anyways, you can make your own decisions. This is very important things that are going on. This is coming into geopolitics now, because, Iran and Russia and China, they're like, this ain't cool. So getting back to this, this was framed by U.S. officials as reflecting the severity of the accusations and the threat they see from trafficked drugs into United States. So Biden did raise the reward, but in context, it was part of a continuation of criminal pressure, not a bizarre brand new policy, which I understood that. How this fits or doesn't fit with international law. Reward equal criminal justice tool. Legally, a bounty isn't the same as military force. It's a law enforcement tool. Governments sometimes do this with fugitives who have fled abroad, like terrorism, terrorism suspects, or drug kingpins. There's legal precedent in the U.S. and many other countries. The bounty itself doesn't authorize force or invasion. Okay, I understood that too. So ChatGPT is kind of just breaking this down in bite-sized pieces. I guess it doesn't realize how much I know or how much I don't know, so it's just giving me all of it. And this is crucial, it says. A bounty is normally intended to help police or allied authorities arrest someone lawfully. Okay? So the United States is calling this law enforcement operation, but probably what they should have done is just use the DEA, which I think the DEA has authority to operate outside of the borders, and maybe not use the military. I think that's where this conflict comes into play. But there were 32 Cuban officials, we'll call them, and so maybe the U.S. didn't know how much, or maybe they knew how much like combatant they could have had if they just sent in the DEA. But it seems like our police forces, even local community police forces, are so militarized that the DEA they should have equivalent military equipment to be able to go in and fly their helicopters and do what they got to do what they got to do. But we use the military. So anyways, let's get back to what this is saying, because it's really focused, and it's good. It gets to the point. So even with a bounty, the use of U.S. military force in Venezuela, and so this is what I was getting to. Even with a bounty, the use of U.S. military force in Venezuela, which actually happened, is separate and much more legally controversial. So the bounty is just one piece of many policies. Why some people see it as lawful within U.S. law. Within U.S. law, offering a reward for information in a criminal case is routine and does not require UN approval. Law enforcement does it all the time. The U.S. government treats Maduro like any fugitive allegedly responsible for large-scale criminal activity. But why it feels unusual internationally. Even if it's lawful in the U.S. domestic context, critics argue it politicizes criminal law by targeting a sitting head of state rather than someone who's fled. It can be seen as a tactic tied to regime pressure, not just law enforcement. And it tends to heighten tensions in international relations, especially when paired with sanctions or military threats. There goes that military use again. That's why countries like Iran and Venezuela call it interventionalist and violating norms. About your comparison to Iraq and Afghanistan, this gets into common misconception. Iraq and Afghanistan 2001, U.S. intervened after 9/11 under collective self-defense and with broad international support in varying forms. So, in Venezuela, I would say, the United States would say, we have part one of Afghanistan, but not part two. The U.S. is participating in collective self-defense from the actions going on in Venezuela, but also the alleged illegitimate leader. But there's not broad international support in varying forms. So Iraq 2003 was highly controversial and lacked UN Security Council authorization. So got away with it once, getting away with it again, I don't know. Many legal scholars still debate its legality through the U.S. and allies framed it as a defense and preemptive action. And so it seems like this whole Iraqi situation is what was used in some part, or the mentality to go in and get Maduro. Both were massive international military operations with lengthy operations and coalition forces. What happened in Venezuela? There was no valid UN mandate or broad coalition backing the military action to capture Maduro, even though it's supposed to be the DEA that actually captured Maduro. From what I understand, the military just provided safety. I don't know. In fact, the UN Security General said the operation sets a dangerous precedent and lacks legal grounds. The bounty itself is purely a criminal justice tool, but the military seizure is a separate and far more legally contentious matter. So even if other interventions were controversial or legally shaky, that doesn't automatically justify similar actions, especially in today's international legal norms. So what's the bottom line, ChatGPT says? Why Biden raised the bounty. It was an increase of an existing criminal reward for Maduro's arrest or conviction under U.S. law. But it also shows that the Democrats and the Republicans were like, we got to come after this guy. It was tied to allegations of drug trafficking and narco-terrorism. The U.S. wanted to show this wasn't just about elections. They were framing Maduro as a criminal threat, which he had already been framed as a criminal threat for a while now. What the bounty is legally in the U.S. A law enforcement incentive, not a military authorization. There they go with that military term again, even though I clearly saw pictures of the DEA. So I didn't see no military pictures. I mean, I saw the helicopters and stuff, but I didn't see no military personnel. I just saw the DEA. What it doesn't do, it doesn't give the U.S. a free pass to use military force in another country. It doesn't change Venezuela's sovereignty under international law. Okay, so we're almost done here. I go on to say to ChatGPT, I'm not understanding the sovereignty completely when Maduro was largely seen as illegitimate. Great question, it says. And this is exactly where a lot of people get confused. Legitimacy and sovereignty are related, but not the same thing in international law. Let me break it down in a way that connects to political reality in Venezuela with how the world generally views state sovereignty. 1. What it means when people say Maduro was illegitimate. When critics, including US, EU, Canada, and many Latin American nations, call Maduro's government illegitimate, they don't mean Venezuela isn't a state, which I understand. So just beware, ChatGPT is going to be giving it to us in bite-sized pieces right now. They mean his claim to be president didn't reflect a credible, free, and fair election. Specifically, the 2024 and early elections were widely criticized for not meeting international standards. The electoral body didn't publish detailed vote tallies that allowed verification. Opposition candidates were excluded or prevented from campaigning effectively. Wow. Institutions such as courts and electoral councils were seen as controlled by Maduro's allies. Observers like the EU said they couldn't verify that Maduro actually won. Independent tallies from opposition figures show a different result than the official count. Sounds like something America's been through a couple times. Just saying. I mean, I'm an independent. I'm a Christian. I believe in fair. I believe in right, and right is right. But some of these things, like institutions such as courts and electoral councils, were seen as controlled by Maduro's allies. Like, come on. Come on. What party in America mostly controls the courts and the electoral councils, if you will, or other electoral style institutions? Getting back to this, so when countries say no democratic legitimacy, they were rejecting the electoral legitimacy. not the basic fact that Venezuela exists as a sovereign state. And we understand that. Why lack of democratic legitimacy doesn't automatically erase sovereignty. Here's the key. Sovereignty equals the right of a state to govern its territory without outside interference. Legitimacy equals how much the government is actually accepted as lawful or reflective of the people's will. A government can be widely viewed as illegitimate for rigging elections or repressing citizens, yet still be recognized internationally as the sovereign government of its country. International law generally says a government is considered sovereign and entitled to protection so long as it has effective control over the territory and population and is treated as the representative government by other states and international bodies, even if some states protest it. In other words, even if many governments reject Maduro's election win, Venezuela as a country still exists and still has a right as a sovereign state. So, this could be what we're seeing here between China, mainland, and Taiwan, right? The People's Republic of China and the CCP, right? So, the People's Republic of China used to be the government of all of China, mainland and Taiwan. And in that conflict, the People's Republic of China government fled to Taiwan to have peace, whatnot, and the CCP took over and is now, for a very long time, has been recognized on the world stage as the legitimate government for China. So, okay, just like, some people may have thought the 2020 election was stolen. And, Biden and his people, they came up, ran up, took control of everything, and they started running it. And people acknowledged that they were in control. And so for 4 years, we had to put up with that. And not to say that this is any better at all. Not to say that at all. Don't get it confused. But, China's not the only place we've seen this type of thing happen. So, again, to run that back, a government can be widely viewed as illegitimate for rigging elections or repressing citizens, yet still be recognized internationally as the sovereign government of its country. International law generally says a government is considered sovereign and entitled to protection so long as it has effective control over the territory and population and is treated as the representative government by other states, which is countries, or international bodies, even if some states protest. And so we can see this kind of happening in Ukraine too, right? The Donbass and all these other areas that see themselves as Russian, but were controlled by Ukraine, and how the government treated them, that's not for me to say, but Russia saw what was going on and felt those people were still their people. The people recognized Russia and they asked for help. And so, now Russia's coming in and taking over all these territories, right? And so now the population is recognizing Russia as their government and not Ukraine. So I can see how this is working out here. For most of the world, including the UN and most governments, sovereignty doesn't disappear just because people dislike how a leader came to power. So 3 here. The difference between political non-recognition and legal rejection. When foreign governments say Maduro was illegitimate, they're engaging in political non-recognition, meaning they might refuse to deal with his government diplomatically. They may deny that his election was acceptable. They may support political alternatives like opposition leaders. But that doesn't mean they automatically have the legal right to intervene militarily or seize a sovereign country's leader or assets without international approval. Sovereignty under international law still protects the state as an entity, even if many nations don't recognize its government legitimized by its governments legitimized by. I'll read that again. So, sovereignty under international law still protects the state as an entity, even if many nations don't recognize its government legitimized by contested elections. Number 4. Why states objected to the U.S.'s operation, even they're calling it an operation, right? Like we have in Ukraine, a special operation. I'm not sure what the government is calling this right now, where they went in and just took Maduro. I guess Trump called it, yeah, we kidnapped him. So, it's just like somebody needs to get this guy a PR, like a good PR person. Like, seriously, like tell him what to say. And not that press secretary, because all she does is scream and holler at the top of her voice. And it's like, and she just belittles people. And it's like, who would look up to that, right? I mean, it's already hard enough to look up to this administration as it is, right? So anyways, why states objected to the U.S.'s operation, even if it didn't recognize Maduro. Here's the tension. Many countries already didn't recognize Maduro's government as as democratically legitimate. But most, and the people, anyways, but most still objected to the U.S.'s military operation to capture him, not because they support him, Maduro, but because they believe international law prohibits unilateral force against another sovereign state without a legal basis, like UN authorization. So even governments that said, we don't accept his re-election, also said, you don't have the legal authority to go into Venezuela with force without international recognized legal justification. That's the heart of the sovereignty debate. A government's lack of democratic legitimacy doesn't automatically authorize foreign powers to overthrow it militarily. There we see the militarily again, and not just the DEA, right? And other countries generally defend those legal norms because they don't want it happening to them, even if they disagree politically. So number 5 here, it says the bottom line and how the concepts connect. So concept, political legitimacy, what it means, whether a leader's rule reflects democratic standards, effect on sovereignty doesn't strip sovereignty. International recognition, what it means, whether other states formally acknowledge a government, effective on sovereignty, influences diplomatic relations. State sovereignty, what it means, the legal right of a state to control its territory. What it means for sovereignty, still exists even if leadership is contested. Hold on for me, okay? Military. So we got international recognition, whether other states formally recognize or acknowledge the government, and it influences diplomatic relations. State sovereignty, the legal right of a state to control its territory. When it comes to sovereignty, still exists even if the leader is contested. Military intervention, use of force by other states, prohibited by without legal justification under international law. And it goes on to say, so a government can be widely seen as illegitimate. That doesn't erase the state or strip its sovereignty. Most of the world still sees Venezuela as a sovereign state, even if they don't accept Maduro's presidency. International law generally protects that sovereignty against external military action unless there's clear legal authority, like a UN mandate or self-defense. So I come back to what is the authority with Ukraine and Russia? Is there, because I thought Russia was a UN member state, right? That's how they're able, at least they're part of the Security Council. So, we just dealt with so long. We've been dealing with so long of Europe and the UN and all these folks condemning Russia for going into Ukraine to protect the people of Ukraine, but we haven't really heard much condemnation about what's going on in Gaza at all. We've heard a lot of support. I mean, we've heard some condemnation. Let me walk that back, right? We did have a period of time before the Trump came out with that useless peace deal that they made up to get people to shut up, in my opinion. And Spain and all these people were, marching forward with the ICCJ. But in reality, I don't think that Israel is a part of the UN. So, right? But Russia is. So, does Russia have an authoritative mandate to be in Ukraine? Right? We just have to level the playing field here. Make sure that, things are balanced out. These are the questions that flow around in my head. And so I said, wow, this is great. So I fully understand Venezuela itself is a country and has sovereignty, but I didn't connect that to Maduro himself. Just like the state swore in the vice president as interim president, the state will, good job, the state still has the power to operate with autonomy. But the illegitimate leader separately from the state still seems to be up for grabs, if you will. This was a great chat. Thank you. This is what I told ChatGPT. I'm kind to my ChatGPT. I don't know about y'all. It said, I'm really glad it clicked, and I want to reflect a small refinement so your understanding is sharp and accurate, because you're very close to how international lawyers actually think about this. And so this is where it kind of hit home for me. I was like, okay, now I can go to sleep. I feel better now. I feel like I better understand. It says you're 100% right on the core distinction now. You got a toy? Venezuela, and it says Venezuela equals the sovereign state, territory, people, institutions, rights under international law. Maduro equals a person claiming to lead a state. Those are not the same thing. And once you separate them, a lot of confusion disappears. Where your framing is strong. You nailed this part. Just like the state swore in the VP as interim president, the state still has the full power and autonomy to operate. Exactly. That's why countries could reject Maduro's electoral legitimacy, recognize an interim president officially, maintain diplomatic relationships with Venezuela as a state, all without denying Venezuela's sovereignty. The one nuance worth looking in, this sentence is conceptually understandable, but legally slippery. The illegitimate leader separately from the state still seems to be up for grabs. A tighter version that lawyers would agree with would be an illegitimate leader can be politically isolated, sanctioned, indicted, and delegitimized. I don't know why I can't say that. But not physically grabbed by another state without lawful basis. So, check. Up for grabs politically? Yes. Check. Up for grabs legally? Indictments, warrants, rewards? Sometimes. X. Up for grabs militarily? Only with very specific legal justification. That's why sanctions, assets freezes, bounties, travel bans, broadly accepted tools, unilateral military seizures, where most of the world draws a hard line. It's not about protecting Maduro. It's about protecting the rule that prevents powerful countries from deciding. case by case, which leaders were allowed to seize. Why your instincts still make sense. Your intuition is actually very common among people who think seriously about power and justice. If someone is illegitimate, criminal, or harmful, why should sovereignty shield them? That tension is real, unresolved, and debated constantly in international law. The system intentionally errs on the side of stability over moral clarity because history shows how quickly justified interventions can spiral. You weren't missing intelligence, you were missing a category distinction. And once you saw it, you immediately integrated it. That's good reasoning. If you ever want, okay. So it goes on to say, if you ever want, we can go through, you know, walk through when leaders have been lawfully removed. Compare this to the Panama Noriega, Libya, or Gaddafi, which that was crazy too. The whole Gaddafi thing, I didn't even think of that. Or zoom out to whether the current system is actually failing to do reform. This was a high level conversation. Thank you for engaging with it seriously. I said thank you. So, this also makes me think about the New World Order's plan for for there to be like 10 sectors of the world, so a bunch of states and countries and things are going to have to come together and be like sector 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And, Trump is looking to go after Greenland next. So it's like, you got from South America all the way up to North America. He already wants Canada. And so, I just had to put a little bit of this in perspective because I although I'm not a fierce I used to be a supporter of Trump until I woke up. And so I'm not a fierce supporter of Trump and the actions that he's doing, but I am a fierce supporter of the United States and the decisions that the United States makes. And so when I hear everybody, including his own citizens and his news media and its congressional leaders, just dog talking an operation that we did, it's like, wait a minute, I got to make some better sense of this. Because it seemed like on some front we had some legal legitimacy to go in, but I think it comes down to the use of the protection of the military for the DEA. So until next time, friends, stay alive and stay woke.